everyone. I welcome you to CEC lecture series. I am Nupur Chawla, teaching English literature at Maitri College, Delhi University. This lecture is the second part of the lecture where we are discussing two important essays of the middle of the 20th century, that is on the rule of the road and on courage, right. Now, in the previous lecture, we looked at the background of the author of these two essays, that is A.G. Gardiner, and towards the end, we also understood that what is the premise that this essay actually begins with, right? So, in the beginning of the essay, we said that the author describes a situation in Russia on a street where a woman is trying to cross the road, and we notice that she refuses to walk on the pavement, and she says that I'm going to walk where I like. We have got liberty now. So we were discussing that how right at the outset, then the essay introduces a particular social condition in Petrograd, that is of liberty. Now, we all of course know the context of Russia, just a bit of Russian history. If we understand that how Russian Revolution brought back the dignity and centrality of the middle classes, and also and it questioned the autocratic rule of the czars, right. So, therefore, the idea of liberty then becomes very crucial to their context, and that is what the author of this essay also has taken from, right. Now, the author then builds on this response of the woman, and he says next, and I quote, "It did not occur to the dear old lady that if liberty sanctioned the pedestrian to walk down the middle of the road, then the end of such liberty would be universal chaos. Everybody would be getting in everybody else's way, and nobody would get anywhere. Individual liberty would have become social nihilism," unquote. Now, very important observation. He says that what this dear old lady does not understand is that if she practices such liberty, then it is going to lead to universal chaos. Now, you see, what is very, very fascinating in this particular essay is the fact that how Gardiner is not denouncing liberty, he is not critiquing liberty, but somewhere he is trying to drive home the point that how with liberty comes a very strong sense of responsibility, which a lot of times people tend to ignore, right. Even though he never uses this word, but that is what we understand, and you will notice as we go along, right. So, that is what he says here, that if she does not understand that such a liberty would lead to universal chaos. Why? Because she is for that matter, if everybody in the name of liberty just went on doing what they felt was right, it would lead to what he calls as social nihilism. Then of course, when you are when you're actually reading the essay and you are at this juncture in the essay, you tend to stop and question, well, is the author trying to critique liberty then? Is he saying that individual liberty should be there, but maybe it should be limited by something? These are some very obvious questions that come to mind, but the answer is no, right. In fact, he is giving a very nuanced understanding of what liberty should mean in society, right. So, let us look at this third point that he makes in the essay, and we will understand his argument further. He says, and I quote, There is a danger of the world getting liberty drunk in these days, like the old lady with the basket, and it is just as well to remind ourselves of what the rule of the road means. It means that in order that the liberties of all may be preserved, the liberties of everybody must be reduced. You have submitted to a curtailment of private liberty in order that you may enjoy a social order which makes your liberty a reality, unquote. Now you see here, this particular excerpt has two parts of it, right, and we will discuss it one by one. Now the first point that your author makes over here is that that just like this lady, the entire world, as he says over here, is becoming liberty drunk. Liberty drunk means that everybody wants liberty. Many of them have also acquired or achieved liberty, but well, a lot of them miss the point of this very, very important social human value, right? And he says that this is where the rule of the road comes in. And if you remember, that's what the title also is. Now, this is derived from this metaphorical event, okay? Where, and what event is this? Where we notice that this woman is crossing the road. She says that I will not use the payment, I will not use the pavement, and I will just walk wherever I want in the middle of the road. So, to that, Gardiner is saying that there is a rule of the road that everybody must be mindful of, quite unlike this lady. Now, so what is this rule of the road? He explains this in this particular excerpt that we have just now mentioned. It means that in order that the liberties of all may be preserved, the liberties of everybody must be reduced. Now, here the word reduced does not mean that he is saying that or he is talking about the taking away of the liberties of the people. No, he is saying that there should be, or if there are certain structures in which people operate, okay, certain set of rules that they follow, then in that case, and I mean this is what he calls as the curtailment of private liberty, right? That's the word, that's the phrase he uses. Curtailment of private liberty. How is it curtailed? Again, you see, all these words are to be understood not in the literal meaning, but in the larger context. That private liberty is not exactly being curbed, but well, there are a set of rules, certain set of structures that are being put in place for people to follow, right? I know that this is a very delicate point when we discuss the question of liberty, but let's try to understand it. So he says that there needs to be a curtailment of liberty so that the liberties of everybody might be preserved. So which means that when each of us is operating in some kind of a minimal structure, that ensures that we do not impede or we do not get in the way of somebody else's liberty. So you understand it's a very subtle point that when we follow a certain set of rules or prescriptions, that is also one of the ways for us to ensure that everybody else also gets their own share of space to act the way they want without somebody else barging into it. Okay, so this is a very nuanced argument that Gardiner makes here, and this is very different from the curtailment of liberties in the case of authoritarian regimes. That's not what he is talking about, right? So this is a very subtle point that he is making, that how people need to be aware of this fact that there should be or there would be certain limits put onto onto individual liberty, and that in turn is one of the ways to ensure the larger liberty for everyone. And that's why he goes on to quote where he says, liberty is not a personal affair only, but a social contract. It is an accommodation of interests in matters which do not touch anybody else's liberty, of course. I may be as free as I like, unquote. Now, another very important point that he makes here, and another way of reiterating, he says that liberty is not a personal affair only, and everybody needs to understand that. It's a social contract. Now, social contract is a sociological term, right? Which means a certain set of rules, implicit rules that we all follow as people who are living in a society. You see, a society becomes a society because of these different kinds of contracts. I will not go into it because it's a sociological concept, and that can take another time for discussion. But if you want, you may look up the idea of social contract, and many sociologists have talked about this at length, about this concept. But coming back, what he says is liberty is not a personal affair only, but a social contract. So he says that till the time we are in a space that our actions are not impeding somebody else's liberties, as he says, which do not touch anybody else's liberties, I may be as free as I like. Now, of course, the question for us to ask is that are there any spaces where we are completely by ourselves? Maybe, and also maybe not. But the point that he is constantly driving home is the idea of the social consciousness that must be there, along with liberty and a sense of responsibility to the others as well, right? And then he goes on to say, and I quote, "We have a whole kingdom in which we rule alone, can do what we choose, be wise or hilarious, harsh or easy, conventional or odd. But directly we step out of that kingdom, our personal liberty of action becomes qualified by other people's liberty. Here, a lot of people in the world and I have to lodge my liberty to their liberties." Now, I know that there's a lot of repetition of the word liberty, well, but that's how he's written the essay. Maybe that's also a very deliberate use of language, but I know that as a listener, sometimes it comes across as jarring. But but the point that we need to take away here is that he's reiterating, but in different words, that there can be spaces where he says that we have a whole kingdom, right, in which we rule alone. So he is establishing the fact that yes, there are spaces, there are domains, there are moments when we are by ourselves, we are our own rulers, we decide to formulate the rules by which how we wish to conduct ourselves, right? But he says that but in most spaces, our personal liberty of action becomes qualified by other people's liberty. So, and this is the space that we need to acknowledge and be sensitive to, right? And that's why he says that we are all liable to forget this. And unfortunately, we are much more conscious of the imperfections of others in this respect than of our own. So, a reasonable consideration for the rights or feelings of others is the foundation of social conduct. Now, you see, that's the second important point that he is making, because I'm sure that you must be wondering that why is he talking about liberty and responsibility so much? Because he's wanting to arrive at this point that we need to have a reasonable consideration for the rights and feelings of others, and this is the foundation of any social conduct, right? Which means what? He is discussing or asking us to be human. When we are human, we have a kind of consideration for the others, their rights, their feelings, their priorities as well. And he says that this kind of a value system needs to be the foundation of social conduct. Now you see, what is he doing here? He is introducing a very important humane understanding, a human-centered sensibility, a social or an idea of social responsibility, all of which are important for a society to understand, particularly a society that has very recently fought for and won liberty. Because you see, let's understand the psyche behind it, that a group of people that have been under bondage for very long, have struggled to get that freedom, they run the risk of becoming very, very self-consumed in enjoying this liberty. And that's where this essay finds its place, right? He therefore goes on to discuss the final point of this essay, and I'll quote from the concluding lines. He says, and I quote, "It is in the small matters of conduct, in the observance of the rule of the road, that we pass judgment upon ourselves, and we declare that we are civilized or uncivilized. The great moments of heroism and sacrifice are rare. It is the little habits of commonplace intercourse that make up the great sum of life and sweeten or make bitter the journey," unquote. What is he talking about here? He's saying that in life generally, great moments of sacrifice, heroism are a rarity, okay? That not every day do we come across opportunities where people would be, where people can display their heroism or people can show sacrifices. He says it's these little habits of the commonplace intercourse, means in day-to-day moments, in day-to-day interactions, and also in these very inconsequential and little habits that make up the great sum of life. Means it's these small, one can say that it's a collection of these small moments that actually form the great sum of life, or that actually come to define life as sweet or bitter. The very, very wonderful point that he makes to conclude the essay, and making people aware, making them conscious of their very small, minute, everyday, inconsequential moments. For example, the metaphor that he takes is of crossing the road. It's not a great moment, right? Something that we all witness in our day-to-day lives, and that's why he has taken this very commonplace small moment, and he said that it's in these moments, the way we conduct ourselves, whether we are respectful of others or we are not, it's these moments that decide or that define whether life is sweet or a bitter journey, right? So with this, we conclude the discussion of the essay on the passing of the road. And now we move to the other essay that is called On Courage. Okay. Now I'm sure before we transition to the other essay, you understand the beauty of Gardiner's thought and approach. He's a humanist, and once again, let's not forget, these values are being reinforced at a time when the world needed them the most. When? During the First World War, when each individual was at the throat of the other, or when some of the others were on the brink of achieving, freedom out of the chaos. So Gardiner is addressing, all these concerns at that point of time, right? Now, this next essay that we are going to talk about, that is called On Courage, will quite directly speak to this historical moment, okay? And as the title itself also says, it is on courage, right? We'll just talk about that. But, he also, once again, that is another aspect of, his style of writing, that sometimes he gets anecdotal, okay? And here we see that element appear in the essay. He says, and I quote, "I was asked the other day to send to a new magazine a statement as the event of the war, which had made the deepest impression on me. But if I were asked to name the instance of individual action which had most impressed me, I should find the task more difficult." What is he saying? That I was asked to talk about a moment about the war which really impressed me. He said that, well, do I talk about it in general or do I talk about it in individual terms? He begins the essay on this note, right? And then he goes on to say, should I select something that shows how war conscript or something that shows how it exalts? If the latter, I think I would choose that the beautiful incident of the sailor. And then he, discusses the incident of the sailor. So he says that I will, I'm thinking that do I, choose a moment, choose to talk about a moment that exalts individuals. And then he thinks about the case of a sailor who is the only one on the shore that is being let free, and the others are, in bondage. And we look at this quote. He had won by ballot a place in one of the boats. The ship was going down, but he was to be saved. One pictures the scene. The boat is waiting to take him to the shore in safety. He looks at the old comrades who have lost in the ballot and who stand there doomed to death. He feels the passion for life surging within him. He sees the cold, dark sea waiting to swamp its victims. And in that great moment, the greatest moment that can come to any man, he makes the conquest choice. He turns to one of his comrades and he says, "You've got parents?" He says, "I haven't." And with that word, so heroic in its simplicity, he makes the other take his place in the boat and signs his own death warrant, unquote. A very, very moving incident that Gardiner talks about here. This sailor, who was the only one that was being ferried across the sea and was saved, and all the others that were left behind were doomed to death. And then all of a sudden, he just stops and asks a person, "Do you have parents?" And he said, "Yes." And then the sailor says, "I haven't." So he allows this man to exchange place with him, and he chooses death while trades his own liberty and gives it to him. Incredibly moving, right? So this once again, he gives us an instance of an act of courage and heroism in the essay, right? I'm sure that this little incident or the discussion would have piqued your interest further in this particular essay. And you will look at the other essays by Gardiner and understand, the very, very refined sensibilities that he had as an essayist writing in the middle of the 20th century. Thank you.